Hello and welcome to DSW's Endpoint Assessment for the Level 4 Junior Management Consultant Standard. My name's Isobel, I'm a product owner at DSW and I'll be talking you through this standard today. This recording is designed to give you an overview of what will happen during endpoint assessment, what to expect, when it will take place, but also how apprentices can prepare and what support is available. By the end of this, you should have a clear understanding of how the process will work and what the requirements are. And of course, if there are any questions or anything you need more information on, we'll show you where to go for additional support at the end of the recording. Today we'll be discussing what the endpoint assessment process looks like, how and when it will be delivered, what happens during the assessment itself, and we'll go into more detail about the Junior Management Consultant Standard, how each assessment method works, and how it will be graded. What is endpoint assessment? This is what we call the series of assessments an apprentice must take to prove they're able to do the job for which they've been training. These take place once the on-programme period is complete and the apprentice is deemed ready for endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessment focuses on the apprentice proving their competence through the work they've done, and it forms 100% of the assessment of this apprenticeship. Assessment design and delivery. DSW create assessment materials in line with robust design principles that are recognised by Ofqual. These principles are validity, reliability and comparability, manageability, and minimising bias. This means you can be assured that our assessments are appropriate for the standard, that everyone will get the same experience, that the assessments will be consistent and fair, and that everyone will have a chance to succeed. When does endpoint assessment happen? Endpoint assessment begins when the on-programme phase has been completed, required functional skills have been achieved, and the employer and training provider agree that the apprentice is competent. This next stage is called Gateway, and it's when the apprentice begins preparing for the endpoint assessment process. What happens during endpoint assessment? The apprentice completes the assessments detailed in the assessment plan. There is still an expectation that the apprenticeship training provider will support apprentices throughout the endpoint assessment period. This is to ensure that they're familiar with what's to come, and so mock exams can be completed with them. In order to pass and be deemed competent, the apprentice must pass all of the assessments. This typically happens over a period of 3 months from the point they are approved for Gateway. The focus of the endpoint assessment is on the apprentice being able to prove their competence in the role of junior management consultant through work completed in the final assessment stage. This entails demonstrating competence in the 16 learning areas defined in the standard. There are a total of 55 pass criteria and 42 distinction criteria which are mapped to these learning areas. There are 2 assessment methods within the standard, the portfolio and the presentation with interview. We'll look at each method in a bit more detail now. Portfolio of evidence. The portfolio of evidence enables the apprentice to reflect and present examples of their application of the knowledge, skills and behaviours within the standard. Evidence can be collected during the on-programme phase and should exclude workbooks, assignments or other pieces of work which have been formally assessed as part of the on-programme delivery. Any evidence with signs of marking will not be assessed and will not contribute towards the final grade. We would recommend that evidence is collated towards the end of the programme, as this is when the apprentice should be competently demonstrating the knowledge, skills and behaviours required. The apprentice will select appropriate evidence to meet the learning outcomes detailed in the referencing table. The apprentice will need to describe and evidence 5 work situations presented through 3 to 5 detailed reflective statements, which should be written once the apprentice has passed through Gateway. The work situations selected for the reflective portfolio should cover the following. They should be presented as reflective statements which demonstrate your competence in the knowledge, skills and behaviour learning outcomes. One work situation will focus primarily on the knowledge learning outcomes, one on the skills and one on the behaviours. The other 2 can cover any combination of each outcome. Each reflective statement is a written account of a specific work situation and must be supported by product evidence. It's the apprentice's responsibility to ensure that the evidence covers the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the standard. All evidence should be accurately referenced to correct learning outcomes using the portfolio referencing table. The work situation should be supported with product or performance evidence. The toolkit provides guidance on what type of evidence can be included in the portfolio and a steer on how to ensure that evidence is sufficient, authentic, relevant and current. The apprentice will need to complete the relevant referencing table, which should indicate which reflective statements and which pieces of evidence in the portfolio meet each learning outcome. The presentation and interview should be booked in at least 3 weeks after the portfolio has been submitted to allow the apprentice to appropriately prepare. This allows time for the portfolio to be assessed and the apprentice to be made aware of the learning outcomes which will be focused on in the presentation and interview. Reflective statements. When we refer to a reflective statement, we want to know what the apprentice has done in a specific situation, who, what, where, why and when. Build a picture behind the situation, and from there they can pull on pieces of product and performance evidence which demonstrate exactly what they've done in relation to their reflective statement. It's a great way for apprentices to bring all their evidence together and give a more rounded picture of what they're capable of. They do need to make sure they corroborate what they've said in their reflective statement with evidence, as it is purely anecdotal. Evidence types. There is no minimum or maximum in terms of pieces of evidence the apprentice can include in their portfolio. One piece of evidence could span several learning outcomes, or you may find that some learning outcomes require more than one piece of evidence to be mapped to them in order to evidence them in full. A piece of evidence might be a single document, or it might be a folder containing a number of documents which link together. The most important thing is that the entire learning outcome is covered in full, using evidence which is sufficient, authentic, relevant and current. More information and guidance on providing evidence can be found in the toolkit. We'll go now on to different types of evidence. Types of evidence. As you can see, there's a wide range of evidence types, and this list is not exhaustive. There should be a blend of evidence types, and you may find that the evidence you choose to provide is quite different to what appears here, which is fine as long as it's demonstrating the learning outcomes. We do ask that videos and recordings are a maximum of 2 hours, and they will need to be timestamped in the referencing table. Presentation and interview. The presentation and interview will be carried out and recorded using video conferencing technology. Prior to the presentation and interview, the assessor will identify 16 assessment criteria across knowledge, skills and behaviours to be covered within the presentation and interview assessment. A template will be provided to the panel members which documents which 6 specific outcomes will be focused on in the presentation and which 10 will be the focus of the interview. The 16 selected criteria can be drawn from across the standard but must include all past criteria which were not demonstrated in the portfolio. The training provider will be required to provide the apprentice with the criteria and support them in preparation for the presentation and interview. The presentation and interview must take place in a suitable location, free from interruptions and distractions. The presentation will last for 20 minutes with a maximum of 10% additional allowance. Anything in excess of this will not be assessed. The apprentice will present to a panel of a minimum of 2 members, the employer and the endpoint assessor. This could also include the training provider or other stakeholders in the assessment process. The apprentice may deliver the presentation using media of their choice. They may use slide decks, handouts and visual aids. The apprentice must focus their presentation on the 6 specific outcomes chosen by the endpoint assessor. Once the apprentice has completed their presentation to the panel, a small break may take place should the apprentice need it. The interview will follow directly after the presentation and will last for 40 minutes with a maximum of 10% additional allowance. Anything in excess of this will not be assessed. The interview will be between the apprentice and panel using a set of criteria and questions developed by the assessment organisation. The focus of the interview will be on the 10 specific outcomes which the endpoint assessor has chosen. The endpoint assessor will use their judgment and expertise to ask follow-up or probing questions where appropriate. This will be in the first 35 minutes of the interview. Following this, the panel will have the opportunity to ask the apprentice questions in the final 5 minutes of the interview. The endpoint assessor will also ask 2 to 3 questions at the end of the interview around the apprentice's learning journey. These questions will not contribute to the overall grading of the endpoint assessment and will not be included in the 40 minutes allocated to the interview. The apprentice will then be thanked for their time and asked to leave the call to allow the panel to discuss the assessment. Panel grading. During the presentation and interview, the panel will need to use the template provided by the endpoint assessor with the outcomes for each method to mark the apprentice accordingly. At the close of the interview, the apprentice will be asked to leave so the panel can discuss their performance. The recording will continue for the duration of the discussion. The discussion should take no more than 15 minutes. The panel members should put forward their indicative grade and justification. If a consensus is not reached on the day, the template should be submitted to the endpoint assessor. The endpoint assessor will use their marking templates from the panel members and their own assessment of the apprentice's performance to issue the final result within 5 working days of the assessment taking place. The grading decision is subject to DSW's IQA process, so cannot be communicated to the apprentice on the day. Component grading. There are 2 graded assessment methods, a reflective portfolio and presentation and interview. A minimum of a pass must be obtained in both methods to achieve an overall pass grade. A distinction must be achieved in both methods to achieve an overall distinction grade. To pass the portfolio, at least 47 pass criteria must be met. To achieve distinction in the portfolio, in addition to meeting the pass criteria, 21 of the 42 distinction criteria must be met. To pass the presentation and interview, 13 of the selected criteria must be evidenced, including all of those which were not evidenced in the portfolio. To achieve distinction in the presentation and interview, in addition to meeting the pass criteria, 8 distinction criteria must be demonstrated. These can be drawn from any area of the standard. Overall grading. There are 3 levels of outcome available: fail, pass and distinction. A pass must be achieved in both methods to achieve a pass overall, and distinction in both methods to achieve a distinction overall. Results will be communicated to the training provider within 5 working days of the assessment taking place. Resits. The apprentice will have the opportunity to resit or retake failed assessments. The operations team will be in contact after notification of a fail grade to confirm if you would like to proceed with a resit or retake. A resit does not require further learning, whereas a retake does. Once a cost has been agreed, the assessments can be rebooked. The apprentice's employer will need to agree that a resit or retake is an appropriate course of action and should assist the apprentice to create a supportive action plan to help them prepare for a resit or retake. Thank you for watching. We hope this has been helpful. As always, we're happy to help if you have any questions or need any further information, so please do get in touch. You can email us at info@dswapprenticeships.co.uk or give us a call on 01302 760 008. Thank you.